and welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Mike Bosak's our guest. Mike is with the Landmark Society of Greater Utica, and landmarks are what we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about their new ornament, their new Christmas ornament, and we'll also talk about their holiday house. That's a tradition that they've been doing for a while. But before we do any of that, we're going to say welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Joe.
Thank you. The Landmark Society, for those who aren't familiar with it, has been around how long?
Since 1974. And we've been involved in all kind of preservation things. Primarily, we were formed to combat the threat against Union Station. That was very threatened back in the mid-70s. They talked about tearing it down and putting up what they referred to as an Am Shack, which would have been a real travesty.
Which you see all around the Amtrak routes, you know, and it's so nice to have a city the size of Utica with that beautiful station versus some of these other places you go to, like Syracuse, for example, right up the road.
Syracuse had nothing compared to ours.
Yeah, and now they've got just a little, what do you call them, Am Shacks?
Well, they do have the larger facility that's actually run by the bus company, Centro, and all, which is kind of the mode that happens in Albany and several other places as well. But Utica's is the real deal.
Yeah. And look at, what was that beautiful one? Was that Chicago or Detroit, Mike, that had that beautiful station that's now not being used at all? It's all fenced off.
Well, Chicago had a very beautiful station. They lost part of it.
Yeah, not Chicago. Must
but
be
Detroit.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a little story where in 1964, the accounting department, which was on, I think, the second floor of Union Station, was moved to Detroit, Michigan Central Station. And it is a phenomenally grandiose and huge structure. It actually models Grand Central Terminal. It was done by the same architects, Reed and Stem and the other two, but they also built the tower, the office tower next to it or behind it, and that has sat vacant for a long, long time. Recently purchased by Ford Motor Company, which is a huge to-do because they have the money to restore it, and I believe they're going to be using that as a headquarters for electric vehicles and some of their more innovative vehicles and all that. So that's a big win, but it's been known as the most quintessential urban ruin in the country, basically.
And I don't know why I said Chicago. I've been in the Chicago station many times. That's a beautiful station as well. Repurposing, and I guess that's the way you save these buildings, isn't it, Mike? I mean, you just can't say, well, we want to save this building, let it sit there. You got to find a use for it.
You do, and that's the key to preservation. You can save something for posterity, but you really need to be able to reuse it, and that is the critical point in any of this.
Got to get bodies in there.
You do.
And look what they've done down at our Union Station. I mean, DMV's in there, tourist centers in there, the buses in there.
Interestingly enough, it's fully occupied, and when it was the New York Central Station, it was never fully occupied. They actually had to rent out space because they didn't have enough employees to fill the entire building.
Was that 1913, Mike?
1914 is when it opened.
1914. And when that opened, boy, that was really a colossal thing. New York Central. It
was. They had actually looked to do to combine their various sections together, and Utica was going to be a junction point. And the unions got a hold of that and said, no, that won't happen. So it was basically New York City to Albany, Albany to Syracuse, Syracuse to Buffalo. So that's why it was built as grandiose as it was.
Yeah. As long as we're talking about Union Station for a second, the REA wing of Union Station, which was really, REA was the forerunner of UPS and FedEx and all that.
Oh yes, everything went by train. All the express, which is basically packages, like would be handled by UPS and the like. And
the county executives made Anthony Picente's made a big effort to save that REA wing.
He has, and there have been a lot of things talked about it for a long, long time. It's actually coming to fruition finally, and it looks great.
When the REA wing was operating, all the freight would come off the trains coming east and west through Utica. They would bring it in one side of the building, correct, Mike? And then the trucks would pull up in the other side?
On the north side. And the south side, the platform was raised up to truck level, and then they would just load up the trucks and take off. And that whole section of Main Street was Meatpackers Row. There were all kind of packing places and all back in the day.
Speaking of repurposing buildings and railroads, there was a railroad, what's the best way to put it, a railroad building, small little railroad station on Genesee Street for many years that has been repurposed. I think it's called a beer hub now,
Yes, right past the tracks as you're going south, not quite New Hartford. Actually, at the time that it was built, it was New Hartford, but it's the old Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western station. And I think it was a hair salon, perhaps, and an insurance company for a while.
Yeah.
But now it is called the Beer Hub, and it's a very cool place.
Another one of those stations, in fact, they look a lot alike, is in New Hartford. The New Hartford town government was using it for a long time, but I think they've sold that.
They sold the property, and a little concerned about that because we don't know what's going to happen. I think it was sold to Clifford Fuel, and they tend to build large-scale convenience stores and gas station dispensing facilities. So, you know, we're hopeful that that will not meet a bad fate because of that.
Yeah, and as long as we're talking about these kinds of things, one of the things that I consider a landmark, I don't know if Landmarks considers it a landmark or not, but it's on Schuyler Street, and that's the old tower, signal tower.
Certainly. It's actually one of the few that's still in place where it was originally placed and all, and they used to have them at various intersections. It's actually a signalman's tower, and they would be able to control the gates and all that. You know, it's one of the few areas where the train actually goes right down the middle of the street. They had several at ground level at the other end of Schuyler Street, and I think somewhere in the middle as well, that people would actually be in there and would control the gates or flag the intersections when the train was coming through.
There was something in your newsletter, your most recent newsletter, about the railroad display at the Children's Museum. That's a landmark?
Well, it is to a point. Certainly it shows an Adirondack railroad back in the day of the Olympics, 1980 Winter Olympics and all that.
In fact, that engine went up to Lake Placid, yes?
That was called the Tampa Tiger. It was actually orange. It wasn't painted green. The Utica and Mohawk Valley chapter of the NRHS purchased it, painted it, and put it on display there in the late 80s. And it's been there ever since, along with a Santa Fe dining car and a Pennsylvania cabin car, or caboose as they call them.
Is there some danger that that's going to have to move out of there?
Well, hopefully not, but there is some talk about them repurposing that building from the Children's Museum, and the Children's Museum's been there since the 1980s, I believe. And you know, talking about lofts, and lofts are good, but you can't have too much of a good thing. And the fact that that is a very diverse neighborhood right now, I think bodes well for that neighborhood. If you had nothing but lofts, I don't think it would be quite as good.
I think it was Doug Preston that had an involvement getting that exhibit down there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Doug was a terrific guy and a wonderful historian, and he had a lot to do with that, especially the locomotive, the 6721, which was damaged several years ago when the runaway car came down, smashed into the engine, and that into the tower for Union Station for the overhead walkway. They did get some money, but not enough to get it fixed completely. So they're still working on getting that repaired.
Okay. I said we're going to show the Christmas ornament, so we better do that, and we will, right after this short break. Right back.